Executive Vice President, Seven Step RPO. Greg directs the company's client acquisition and business development strategies. He has 18 years of experience in recruiting, specializing in client relationship development, team building, and recruitment, sales, and training. Greg is here to speak on a topic that many HR people ask themselves about, which is how to get the most out of the technology they have. Please welcome Greg Karr.
Thanks. Get the little clicker right up here. Great. Thank you. Morning, everybody. I have 14 minutes, so the biggest thing I'm nervous about is trying to stay on time. I sometimes can't introduce myself in 14 minutes. So I'm actually not going to talk about how to get the most out of your technology by how you use technology, but more about how you get the most out of your technology as it relates to how you use your people. So the talent acquisition superhighway that we put on the slide, refers essentially to the ecosystem that we all build, right? Everybody in the room, manages a number of talent ecosystems for your organization or for your clients, depending on whether you're a practitioner or a provider in the room, right? I don't know if anybody was in Elaine Euler's or if she's here, the meeting that she did this morning. Intelligently, she had everybody stand up at the beginning, 8 o'clock in the morning or 8:30 in the morning after a late night, and asked how many tools you use in your organization from a technology perspective, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, got up to 7 or 8, and everybody was still standing. So the point was made, right? There's, dozens. She talked about an organization, I think, that had 62 different tools that they use to run talent in their organization, right? And that's everything from ATS to CRM and social and mobile and video and what have you, right? So, I won't put you through the same thing, but we can probably all recognize that this dynamic of an ecosystem is ubiquitous. We all have, our organization, we have obviously numbers of clients, and they all have, systems, and we work with them to drive those things effectively, right? So I want to talk a little bit about, quickly, kind of what's maybe changed in that context. In other words, how we got to that point of these really powerful, robust, talent ecosystems or technology ecosystems. And at the same time, some things that haven't necessarily changed. So in other words, when recruiting was simple, when I started doing it in 1993, notice I don't say easy, but simple, right? You didn't have applicant tracking systems, you didn't have job boards, you didn't have all kinds of stuff. You had fax machines and phones, and that was about it, right? You opened a job, you got on the phone, you ran through the process, and the primacy really, and sorry for the skipping around after everybody's late night. I hope I don't make anyone dizzy with the deck itself, but good recruiting was really about good relationships, right? Your ability to listen to the person you were talking to, whether that's a hiring manager or a candidate, to empathize with them, to sell the job, to appropriately qualify the candidate, actually network with people, not like network on LinkedIn, but network like asking people for referrals and for phone numbers, and if they'd be willing to put in a good word for you, those kinds of things, right? Those were, that was how you did recruiting, right? It was critical to build these lasting relationships, right? Things changed a bit, right? Population is increasing, the baby boomers and some of the stuff that has been discussed here. Population's going up, workforce is actually going down. Workforces are more specialized, right? If you look at, automotive or, really any industry, right? We do a lot of nursing hires, and there's, all these different kinds of nurses, right? You can work in a manufacturing environment, and, there's not just manufacturing engineers, there's seat engineers and battery ion engineers and what have you, right? A little bit of a misnomer. Tenure's not actually increasing. Mobility is increasing. Tenure's really decreasing, so a little bit of a typo. Sorry about that. Last 10 years, cross-border migration up 41%. So in other words, people don't just move around, jobs and where they happen to live. They move for jobs, whether that's moving domestically or internationally or what have you. And there's an 800% rise in virtual labor over the last 5 years. I work from home. Sat in an office for 15 years or so, plus or minus, and work from my home now, or at least when I'm not on an airplane. So that changed, of course, right? Pace of business changed, right? WhatsApp, right? 5-year-old company that's worth $19 billion, or at least was to Facebook. I don't know if it's worth $19 billion, but was to those guys. Microsoft is sort of the oldie but a goodie up here, kind of a weird thing for those of us that have been around for 20 plus years. You don't necessarily think of Microsoft or Google as these staid organizations, but the rate at which companies grow and drive value has really changed. Along with those things, candidates, right? How candidates approach the process has changed as well, right? These folks have more options. They value the experience that they get in the recruiting process, and then they go out and they talk about it, right? And not just, talk about it like online and social and Glassdoor and what have you, right? So appropriately, we all innovated, right? So you can't, you have to respond to that as a recruiting organization, right? If now we have all these tools and technologies and candidate behavior has changed, we need to formalize that process, right? And we did that. Certainly all of us, I'm sure at some level did that. And there's, consultants and professional services organizations that have built businesses around helping you improve your process and formalize and standardize how you communicate with candidates and building in, the tools and the technology, and along with it, the measurement and analytics, even here this morning and over the last couple of days, huge emphasis on the power and the importance of measuring what's happening and then taking that data and actually analyzing and understanding it, right? And you see it, out here in the sponsors bullpen and, wherever you go. I got an email just before I walked up here from a technology provider that I've never heard of, right? And thank goodness for these guys, right? I mean, it's of course challenging to keep track of it all, but at the same time, incredibly valuable. And all these tools were, created and built, and we're grateful for them to improve the candidate relationship, right? Candidates' ability to find us and engage with us as a recruiting organization, to improve the recruiter's ability to be efficient and drive workflow and so on and so forth, and improve the hiring manager's service, or our ability to service the hiring managers, right? So you would think, and again, if you think back about where you were even 10 years ago to today, it's literally light years, right? So you would think we'd be in pretty good shape, right? Except we're kind of not. I mixed up the sources here. I'm sorry. The top two statistics are actually from a Price Waterhouse report driven towards CEOs, and the bottom stuff is actually from Talent Function. And then there's a couple statistics up ahead that were from CLC. But pretty straightforward point here, right? You've got CEOs saying that their organizations are struggling to find the right kinds of talent. You've got a deficit in the people that you need to actually run your business, right? And you've got candidates who, this is again from Elaine's study, but 55% of applicants who were rejected received little or no context. So in other words, they either got a kind of a form email, thanks, but we're not interested in moving forward, or they got nothing, right? And her point actually was the survey is driven from 46,000 candidates that were surveyed by companies that were proactively trying to improve their recruiting organization. So in other words, it's not indicative of the entire market. There's a huge chunk of the market that isn't doing a darn thing to improve candidate experience. So, if you looked at the 55% of applicants that received little or no contact, that number is actually probably a heck of a lot bigger. So in other words, even though we've built in this technology ecosystem and all these different tools and so on and so forth, you still have organizations who can't quite find the right kinds of talent, and you still have candidates who are feeling disengaged, right, in the context of how they're working with your recruiters, right? So what's missing? Right, I want to highlight four things that we certainly pay a lot of attention to as an organization and admittedly struggle with because it's hard, right? I'm sure you all do the same thing. So it's maybe a back to basics or a challenge or a little bit of both as it relates to, maybe, some things that are missing, and specifically, driven towards what can we do to build better recruiters, right? What can we do to ensure that the people who are actually using these tools, who are talking to candidates, who are talking to hiring managers, are actually able to make that process, productive and high quality for the candidate and the hiring managers, right? So the first thing is pretty simple, right? We as an organization have always driven and continue to drive, and I think it's one of those things that as complex as the tools and the systems that we all have at our disposal are, sometimes the best tool is the simplest, right? And I think that's one thing that hasn't changed, right? You use social media to get people to do some research around your company and to find you. Certainly your CRM and your applicant tracking system and all these different tools are designed to facilitate that kind of interaction. But at the end of the day, you need to have people who are willing to pick up the phone on a consistent basis, high volumes, right? In other words, make a lot of phone calls, make cold calls, God forbid, right? And actually interact with people and sell your organization and compel people to apply, build proactive relationships. I think the other thing to think about is, there's lots of conversation around consultative recruiters, and who you're going to hire, and it's easy to sort of forget that. I've got a prospect that we're interfacing with that provided me with this data that they have plus or minus about 11,000 people or so a year, and they get 400,000 applicants. So that doesn't include searched, sourced candidates, right? Direct search. So what the final number actually is. But that's a huge number for, $9 to $15 an hour people, right? So these are folks that, from a filtering standpoint, have comparatively similar, characteristics. That's a lot to weed through. So it's really clear, of course, how your recruiters can end up being very transactional, right? But you can't do that, right? You need to drive and you need to reinforce, hiring consultative recruiters, right? People who are going to actually be skilled and authentic as it relates to how they communicate, with candidates. And you can hire for those kinds of people. We certainly pay a lot of attention to that, and I think it's important to look at that when you're talking about hiring recruiters. You're not trying to find people who can navigate an ATS system, with skill and speed. You're trying to find people who can actually work with candidates and hiring managers. Training is the third thing I want to hit on. This is, again, from CLC. 23% of recruiters are satisfied with their development. 80% of recruiting managers are reducing training budgets. It's a pretty big disconnect there, right? As a recruiter, I don't feel like I know what I'm doing. Maybe that's not exactly what that says, but kind of close, right? And most of the managers are saying it's not that important to train our recruiters. So that's not good. We've spent a tremendous amount of time in this area. My business partner and CEO and boss, I fondly describe as a training geek, and thank God, because the content that she led and that we've built as an organization that centers around recruitment training is plus or minus 100 and whatever it is today. I don't know. Do you know what it is? 110 or 100 something, 100 plus courses that are essentially geared around, certainly some of them are very much around how do you complete transactions. Most of them are geared around how do you relate to people, how do you relate to different kinds of people and personalities, how do you close and work with folks to build relationships, right? Important to spend time, whether it's through your own program or a program that you buy, training your recruiters and investing in their growth and development. The last thing, again, recruiting, as we all know, some of these characteristics, right? Very visceral, very interactive, and fundamentally exhausting, right? So one of the things that we've tried to pay a lot of attention to, sometimes good to end with a joke, although it's not technically a joke. You look at these kinds of organizations, I think a recruiting organization is very similar. You're trying to build a sense of tribalism and teamwork and collaboration in the people in your organization who do recruiting, whether you've got 3 or 4 of them, or whether you've got 30 or 40 or whatever your number actually is, right? We've got a couple hundred, and the emphasis is on these kinds of things, right? Building a group of people who can work together, who are committed to that client or committed to your organization, who again, are certainly focused and engaged with one another, but are emphasizing having fun, right? We place a lot of priority on that and the dynamic that says, hey, listen, if I can be a person who's a bit more engaged and a bit more enthusiastic and a bit more energetic in how I approach the candidate and the hiring manager population, they're going to tend to communicate better with me. So, I'm 1 minute. I'm a bit under. So, thanks for giving me the 15 minutes. And if there's a quick question or two, great. And if not, I can give you back a minute of your day. Great. Sure.
So you have a lot of training opportunities for the recruiters, 110 or so modules. How do you balance their probably very high rec load, the need to
Yeah.
be meeting client demands, hiring manager demands, with the desire to have them trained and working in probably a more standardized process?
Yeah, that's a great question, and you're right. The rec load in general is high. These are busy folks, that's for sure. I think I mentioned on the slide, I can't quite remember, but we emphasize formality, right? So in other words, that's a part of the day. It's a part of the program. Certainly, when people are new to the organization, they go through an initial certification program or a training program. So in other words, before they actually start making phone calls, they're in this curriculum and the assessment process and validation and testing and what have you. But it's ongoing. So there'll be 1 to 3 maybe, but minimally 1 or 2 a week that are training courses that, depending on the level of people, right? If you're talking about a recruiter or a coordinator or what have you within the organization, there's formal time that's set aside. Predictably, that's kind of early morning or lunch meetings or what have you. That's proctored and delivered by an internal subject matter expert, and on an ongoing basis. So it's a good question and a good point. I think, from our perspective, we make it a priority, right? It's one of those things that's easy to let slip, right? We're just too darn busy to train, right? But we really focus on making sure that there's at least a couple hours in every week around that dynamic of continuing education. Great. Thank you.